Hi, I'm Kurt Dodo with Realm IQ. This is our podcast, Realm IQ Sessions, where we talk about everything AI with AI leaders from around the world. Please give us a follow or subscribe. Today's guest is Peter Csathy, who is a leading media, entertainment, AI, and tech expert who has worn about every hat in the industry in his 30 plus year career that spans traditional and tech-driven media. He's a frequent speaker and writes a weekly column about media, entertainment, AI, and tech, and the Wrap. And he is a fellow podcaster. He is also a graduate of Harvard Law School and began his career as an entertainment intellectual property attorney. Welcome, Peter. You are the first lawyer that I've had on my podcast, so very honored to have you. And we also share a past at Universal Studios.
Yes. Thanks, Kurt. Thanks for having me on. And just so everybody understands out there, started off as an IP entertainment lawyer, and then I became general counsel of one of the operating divisions of Universal. But since that time, I've really been a serial entrepreneur, even though I still work on some legal matters for my clients, but nonetheless, primarily it's really on the business advisory side.
That's cool. Wonderful perspective. And in terms of through the lens of AI,
Yeah.
the lens of legal, I think we want to get into certainly your point of view on what's happening, what's happened with AI around copyright infringement. Uh,
Yeah.
Myself, I am an optimist. I know there were dirty deeds done that may be worked out in courts,
By the
but
way, done dirt cheap. And we'll get into that. The
yeah,
dirty
no.
deeds
So
have been done dirt cheap.
yeah. Yeah. Well, the internet's free, right? It's there. It exists. It's to see. It's there that you put it up. We can take it, right? That's the mentality, free for all. Anyway, so let's get into that. So for our listeners who maybe haven't delved as deep into copyright as
Yeah.
you have, what is going on? What's your stance? And what are we facing in the near term and the long term?
Very good. So, having said the fact that I'm not primarily a lawyer now, what's important is that background because I do follow it very closely. And what I would say to everybody out there, your eyes may glaze over when you hear the words law and legal, but it's truly like all these issues are existing. It's all business. It's all business issues. It's all about where the money goes when value is transferred. So no matter what role you play in the creative ecosystem or in the tech ecosystem, in the world of generative AI, it all matters. So it matters to you as an artist. It matters to you as a producer, as a creator, as the lawyer, as a venture capitalist, everything, as an entrepreneur on the tech side. So that's why this is a really important discussion, Kurt. And I think that's the most important thing, as one of the most important things, just to kick things off. That legal doesn't mean that we get into the weeds about it, but it's an important thing to track and understand. So that's that. When I talk to people about this, I certainly have strong perspectives that I'll get into. But I always say that I come at this stoically. Passionate opinions, I come at it stoically, meaning that the world is as it is. Generative AI is here and moving fast. It will not go away. For those of you who want to wish it away, it will not go away. It will only speed up in terms of its progress. So what's critical is you can only control what you can control. What you can control is how you act in that reality. And so acting in that reality, I would say to everybody out there, is to stay on top of these issues, but to not fear generative AI, but somehow find a way to bring it into your life, learn about it, learn the jargon of it. That's really important. And then experiment with it, whether you utilize it or not. So that's the kind of the high level to everybody as a long preface. Now, having said all that, these are the issues to answer your question directly. So I kind of started things off with generative AI, you have massive amounts of value that have already been created in the marketplace. That's why Nvidia has leapt into $3 billion or $1 trillion plus. I don't know where it is today because the market's crazy, but it's somewhere hovering around that. And that's because of generative AI. So value has already been created extensively. And then you see Microsoft has really catapulted itself in the last couple of years because of generative AI to now be one of the sexiest companies in the world after being really kind of a sleeper for quite some time. And that's because, of course, Microsoft essentially owns OpenAI, which is seen as being the leader. Microsoft is the leading investor, and so for all intents and purposes, many of us see OpenAI as being really controlled by Microsoft. So the copyright issues that come into play matter because it's about this transfer of value. How is the value created? So generative AI is a powerful new technology, but it's a technology that has no power, no utility, unless it was able to train on data. And that's where we get into copyright, because what is that data that it trains upon? Well, as it relates to media and entertainment and everybody in the creative community, and then beyond that, that data includes millions and millions of the world of copyrighted work that find their way onto the internet. So yes, it's on the internet, but they're copyrighted works. That doesn't mean that they can simply be used for whatever purposes that somebody wants to do. Like if merely because a book is available online, I can't copy that book and put my name on it and republish it, things like that. So there's an example. So in this particular case, what we have is we have a number of generative AI companies, OpenAI, Google, et cetera, Anthropic, and Suno and Udio we'll get into on the music side, where they train on a number of different data sources, but they all say three words: available data,
Oh,
close
can
quote.
you repeat that again? You bleeped out there for a second.
Okay, three key words: publicly available data. Anytime you ask these companies what their training data set is based on, they will say publicly available data. And then when you ask them, well, what does that mean? Does that include copyrighted works? Then they'll all say, well, that's our special sauce. We can't tell you what's in there because that's what differentiates us. But it's been demonstrably proven, including just recently by Wired magazine, that as an example, you have OpenAI has trained on at least hundreds of thousands of YouTube videos, as an example, and on and on. So it's essentially been, and with near certainty, all of these generative AI companies have been using unlicensed copyrighted works to train their AI, which means to give them utility, which then created their trillions of dollars of value that have come on board. So those copyrighted works, of course, are from writers like you and me, from studios out there, from artists out there, musicians out there, whatever. And none of this content has been licensed. So the copyright owners see this reality and they say, hey man, you can't just take my works, my copyrighted works, and put it into your sausage factory that will spit out some kind of generative response. You can't do that. You're taking all of this data without paying me for it, and you're clearly creating value for yourself because look at your market capitalizations, et cetera. And then part of that, of course, is, well, you're taking this without paying me, and you're frequently almost always trying to create a market substitute for the content I'm giving you. And so that's the core argument from the copyright owners, is that they contend that just scraping all of this copyrighted content without consent is itself copyright infringement. Now, on the other side, the big tech companies and the generative AI companies, they'll say, hold on, man, hold on. That's fair use. We are only taking what's out there in the open internet, and we are creating something entirely different in value. So it's a fair use that we're creating, which is, fair use is really a kind of a public good concept. That fair use is created as a defense to copyright infringement, as a public policy thing, that because it benefits overall, it benefits society. So that's kind of the core to it.
Yeah.
And they will say, these generative AI companies will say, it's fair use. We're creating something newly powerful for all of society. And we're not trying to create a market substitute for your content. We're just creating something that itself generates something entirely novel that doesn't compete with you. So those are,
Derivative,
yeah,
right? That's a key.
derivative, transformative are kind of words, and so, and it's not substantially similar to, you know, what your work was. And if you don't mind me bloviating a couple on about this, so that's the core thing. But one critical piece for everybody to understand there, after I've kind of set the stage, is that there are two pieces to the copyright infringement analysis when it comes to generative AI and copyrighted works. And that's frequently um, um, compressed into one. At least that's what generative AI companies typically want to do. So they want to a confluence of the two rather than separate. There's the input side of the equation. So taking the copyrighted works, putting into the sausage factory so that the generative AI can train. So on the training side, that's the input side. And then the output side is what comes out once you make a prompt. What is the output that's created by the generative AI? And is that copyright infringement? And so on the first piece, the infringement piece for training, there's no requirement for substantial similarity that under the law. It's just a novel application of existing precedent, and we can talk about that, Kurt, if you want to. So that's the one issue, one side of the equation. And copyright owners, and I would be one of them, would say the mere fact that you are scraping my copyrighted work without consent or compensation, that is infringement. That is an infringement that requires damages to be paid for that harm. And then the second piece, the output side, is a difference analysis, whether the output from a prompt is substantially similar to the input that was there. So I'll just give you one specific example. So like the New York Times, and we'll get into that case more, one of the probably the most important AI media case right now is the New York Times sued OpenAI and Microsoft for copyright infringement. And in their complaint, which is currently winding its way through the lower court, it's both the input side, it's saying that you scraped all our works without consent. And by the way, those works are behind a paywall. And so that's infringement. But there's also they have proven by their own searching and their own use of OpenAI that the output, the actual spitting out, the generated response, sometimes even verbatim captures some of the articles that were scraped, but frequently does concise analyses of these things, including of feature stories that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions sometimes, to create. So that's a lot there, Kurt, but
Yeah, no,
that's the stage.
I appreciate that. And it is complex. Just speaking to the output side,
Yeah.
um, because, I output imagery and I know I can never own the copyright of the imagery that comes out of Dolly or Midjourney. So if nothing coming out on the output side is actually able to be copyrighted, I mean, there is a legal stance and recognition that there's not enough of that human origin to determine whether it's copyrightable. Is that correct?
Well, that question about how much human interactivity is necessary for the output to be copyrightable is not black and white. That hasn't, like, there is no distinct standard of, other than the fact that the Copyright Office has said that there needs to be, I forgot the exact word, but some meaningful contribution from a human for something to be copyrightable.
Yeah.
And so it's like, this is again, just like so many things in the law, it's shades of gray
Yeah.
rather than black and white. But certainly in the litigation right now, such as the New York Times, they are saying that it's an infringement because it's a market substitution that OpenAI is trying to create by scraping its works and then generating responses that are in the world of news and gathering whatever that they've invested millions of on. And they're doing it, OpenAI, Microsoft, and the others are creating these full search capabilities to compete with and replace the New York Times's, and so like taking all that value. So
Yeah.
it's infringement on the output side as well. That's what they're claiming.
Yeah, and obviously the newspapers are having a hard time anyway.
Yeah.
But the dot coms, seem to be doing okay. Once they put up the paywall, right, and help save the industry from selling newspapers, which that's a dying industry,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in terms of how an artist, a writer who wants to use AI, what are some of the cautionary tales that you can give them with the context that
Hmm.
you also use it, but you must be using it with caution because you know the repercussions. So what
Yeah.
are some of those guidelines?
Well, look, I think that the law certainly finds distinctions between individuals who are using potentially infringing services based on whether something's a personal use, whether something's an education use, a nonprofit use, or a commercial use. There are different gradations there. So as something becomes more commercial, it becomes more troublesome for sure. But individuals are going to be in a different boat than large scale companies that are using it for more significant scaled purposes. And then there's another order of magnitude for companies like the platforms themselves, which are creating these enabling platforms for billions of us to be able to generate responses. So it's kind of a great gradation there. Um, on the individual side, if it's non-commercial, then, and I'm just giving you here practical
Right.
thoughts for people out there. If it's non-commercial, it's for education purposes, things like that. I wouldn't worry too much about using, generative AI like ChatGPT or whatever, or Mid Journey or something to create an image, or Google Gemini to create an image or something like that. I wouldn't worry too. Like for a newsletter that's a non-charged newsletter, a free newsletter, I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Done a lot of that, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think you should be fine. Like
All
there's
right.
gonna be much bigger fish to fry. But here's the thing. And I wrote an article recently about this. Like Toys R Us was just the first major brand to use OpenAI Sora to create a fully generative AI created commercial. And obviously for commercial purposes. And it made a big splash. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't. Toys R Us was having a coming out party saying, hey, we're still here. We're more vibrant than ever before. We're really tech savvy now. We're cool. And here, as an example, is this new Sora produced commercial. And
It
they,
it it did kind of suck though.
yeah, I know a lot of people
It's
felt that it
like
sucked. I mean, it was first launched at Cannes Lion, and the reaction was mixed, but I would say more on the downside. But let's put that aside. But the fact that it was doing it to make a big splash and everybody covered, like everybody around the world covered it, so it was clearly for commercial purposes.
yeah.
Um, this I would say, and my article said this, that I think that there is real risk for a Toys R Us who is certainly savvy. They have lawyers and they're making such a big splash about it. They know the controversy that's going around whether these platforms are copyright infringing or not, including OpenAI Sora. So I would say that there is a concept called secondary liability and vicarious liability, or contributory liability, that even though Toys R Us did not create the infringing platform, if it used it for commercial purposes at scale, I think an argument can be made that they also could be found liable for copyright infringement.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that's the way it will go, but there's risk there. And
Yeah.
so you asked the question, like, how should people think about it? The fact that there's risk in using these tools for commercial purposes at scale, that is holding back the industry, like the media and entertainment business, the studios, the Madison Avenue brands. It's absolutely wind in their face, like resisting their use, like fully embracing these tools because they're afraid of liability, potential risk of liability, and they're also afraid, understandably, of creative industry blowback for using this while all these issues are swirling in space.
Well, what's interesting is there's an approach to say this whole spot was done on Sora. Okay. The
Yeah,
other tactic is going down a level of integration and do a regular production, but then use AI and the tools that editors usually use. Now, Adobe Premiere has AI features. If you have
yeah,
to do some wire removal, rig removal, rotoscoping, special effects, lengthening clips, all these very utilitarian tools that editors have normally used, but now they're enhanced with AI. There's probably no copyright infringement because they're just using the information from that scene to like, well, I'm going to just make it longer and make it, so there's just all these
yeah,
little baby steps that help make uh, commercials and or films more efficient in post-production. The phrase it used to be, well, let's fix it in post. But now an editor can say, well, no, we're gonna fix it in AI.
yeah,
Uh, but they don't create the whole thing in
yeah,
AI. They're
yeah,
just using tools to help their normal job. And I think it was a big risk and a big leap for Toys R Us to say, we did this all with Sora. Aren't we cool?
yeah,
And I think what needs to happen is that there needs to be this infusion of building from the middle. All the normal practitioners in that commercial process and venture incorporate the utility of AI that it offers them in their traditional uh, uh, technologies, whether it's Microsoft or editing or Google, whatever tools they normally use, those are now infused with AI. And if they just do that, imbue AI into the process, but it's not the golden carrot, say we produce this whole thing in AI, they
yeah,
they mitigate their risks, but they will have used it. And those are steps forward in terms of adoption. I think the Toys R Us thing was a debacle because it was awful. So it's not going to inspire anyone to say, yeah, I just want to do those types of commercials. Like no one wants to do
yeah,
that. No creative agency wants to do that. Creatives
yeah,
have their own creatives. So it's I think the hype bubble around AI can actually complicate things more when it's used in the wrong way. And I think the magic bullet is to not say this whole thing was created with AI. I think, you know, we need to move towards the efficacy of the technology, that it helps and empowers people who have these jobs, these creative jobs, to do their job better and more efficiently, and they just happen to use it in their daily life as a commercial editor, let's say.
yeah.
It's no big deal, and there's no risk, and so that's a proper use, I think, of AI that has no risk.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a number of layers there. So I want to be very clear. Copyright, and where I'm certainly sympathetic to the creator side when it comes to the question of where the money goes when value is created. That there needs to be a sharing of the money. That's the central point. That it can't be just enabling big tech and generative AI to create all this value for themselves and not share with the creative community on which their IP trained or on their technology trained, because it would be valueless without the content and the data. But to be very clear, I'm a huge believer in the upsides of generative AI too. So this compensation issue will be solved, and I have some ideas there, but it will absolutely be solved. Everybody wants to solve it. Well, not every generative AI player, but most want to solve it. And there's significant negotiations ongoing right now with big tech and big media trying to figure these things out. Some have worked out, as we know, and some haven't yet. I want to talk about a couple that are really interesting. But then to your point about just tools and using them as different tools, like Adobe Firefly, which is the generative AI which is built into the Creative Suite. they say that it's fully ethically trained. And so it was, but Adobe trained its AI only on licensed work that was already in its repository. So when you're using that as a creative for marketing purposes or whatever, you should be entirely safe. I mean, there's some technical exceptions that they were busted on, but nonetheless, you should be entirely safe. And so what you see though in the marketplace is you have a number of companies now that are creating these ethically sourced
Right, right.
LLMs or generative AI engines or platforms. And so the user, know that the only thing it's been trained on are licensed works. And so there is no downside risk. And then ultimately, of course, in whatever generative AI tool you use, there's going to be most likely representations and warranties and indemnifications. So like if you're using generative AI in your big studio or whoever you are, then you have a contract with the big tech company that gives you represents and warrants that there's no infringement, and if there's found to be infringing, then they will indemnify the studio for its use. That
Right.
doesn't mean the studio is not infringing itself contributorily, as I was saying, but at least you're indemnified for damages. So there's that part of it too. um, I, w- I want to give like another example that I think is really a really cool thing, because like you said, if you're an editor or if you're a creator and you have certain nuggets of the film itself, but you just want to get more iterations of it faster so you can create, like that's a really cool like
Yeah.
pre-visualization or VFX or something. Another use case that I think is really cool is that there's all this content that's been created over decades, whether it's music, whether it's film, television, whatever it may be, books, even what I don't know, and it's sitting there collecting dust from former lives. Now, generative AI can be used to bring those to life, to reimagine them, to resurrect them. So, taking black and white films and making them beautiful again. I mean, look at the example that, um, like the Lost John Lennon song that McCartney used generative
Right,
AI to
right.
bring to life. None of us would have heard that song unless generative AI was there to make it
Make it possible.
sonically, yeah,
Yeah.
possible. Like that's a really cool thing. And I think that like that's an example that really excites me.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I call that innovation for good. But it's also creative concept, right? It's somebody creatively trying to figure out a creative solution to the age-old question of, what if John Lennon wrote a song that was never recorded, but we have the lyrics, we have the words, we have the poem. What would
Yeah.
that sound like? I mean, it's an interesting premise, right? And that's somebody creative saying that. And I think it's the creative community that's going to harness these tools and take it to a new platform, a new level that won't be done by, who I call the hackers and just people who, call themselves AI filmmakers when they've never done anything a year ago that had anything related to do with film or didn't go to film school or never done anything like that. So you're right. I'm excited about those exciting events. Those milestones, creative milestones that transform people's interpretation of what looks like controversy to actually, no, it's really cool. And guess what? The estate of John Lennon approved it. So there's no legal issues. And it was cool and memorable, and people know it. And it's a great use of, this technology.
Yeah. I mean, another example, just recent example, was there were several estates, to your estate point, like Judy Garland, where the estate gave permission for 11 Labs, which is an audio generator, to a voice generator, so that now people could use Judy Garland's voice. It's been consented, it's been licensed by
Mhm.
the estate, they can use it, and then the estate of course is compensated for that kind of a use. Like, so there's all kind, now whether Judy Garland would love that or not, who
Yeah.
knows, but nonetheless it keeps like, here are ways to extend the legacy of people and bring them into new generations, which is cool. I'll give you another example if you don't mind, just because this is one that I also think is immensely powerful. You look at artists, innovative musical artist Grimes. Great music, by the way. She and Musk were married at some point. They have kids together. In any event, Grimes is this great innovative artist. Soon after ChatGPT launched, she created a platform called Elf Tech, elf.tech. And what she did was that she gave music stems, so like the little pieces of her music, she made them available, as well as her voice. She made her voice available and stems of her music available to her fans, and her fans could go to town on it. She said, do whatever you want with it. Her only requirement is that if a song the fans create based on those pieces, if it is commercially successful, then she gets to share 50% of the revenues that are generated by the song.
Right.
And I think that the whole idea of artists to be able to give their fans elements of their work, like almost like building blocks,
Mm-hmm.
upon which the
Right.
fans
Yeah.
themselves could play with, build, whatever,
Yeah.
that's really exciting. And then the artists, because the artists are giving the consent, they're setting the terms of what that looks like.
Right. They're
Now
in control.
they're in control. That's great for established artists and established franchises. For those who are emerging and don't have big fan bases, that's not as easy of an opportunity.
Yeah. But again, Grimes, a creative who came up with a concept using
Yep.
technology, empowering herself to monetize her content with her fan base. I mean, these are deals and ways around these controversies, and it's just creatively thinking out of the box. I believe, coming from creators, creative people solving these problems. I don't think the lawyers are going to solve the problems. They'll execute the contracts.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
but it's going to be creative people saying, well, why don't we do this? Why can we do this? And so I think it's really important to the creative community who has a fear factor for some good reasons, but based on the very vocal minority of a few, they're scared to get into the technology when
Yeah,
there are
yeah,
a minority who are actively trying to solve these things, either through licensing or whatever. And so I think the more examples like you listed, the more those stories get out, that I think that it will hopefully ease the fear and help thaw what is really the ice age in Hollywood
yeah,
uh,
yeah. I mean,
as it relates
look,
to AI.
I'll tell you something that I'm in the middle of. It's about solving that compensation problem. So this is the way I see it ultimately playing out. You have all these direct licenses that are being negotiated right now, or trying to. One of the biggest ones so far has been News Corp licensed, entered into a license with OpenAI for 5 years, $250 million paid over 5 years.
Right.
That sounds like a huge number. My bet in 5 years' time is that that will be seen as a deal that was very beneficial to OpenAI, not so much to News Corp. That's my bet. That it will be as great as it sounds today, it will be seen as a fraction of how great it was today then,
Yeah.
because of how fast things will grow. So you have a bunch of companies that are entering into licenses, including the Atlantic, and there's some real good tidbits from the CEO who just recently said what the terms of that deal are with OpenAI. But then you have those like New York Times who said, no, what you're offering me isn't enough. And they're taking this a long way. Now, how long they'll take it, who knows? But the more precedent that's set, the more deals that enter into play, that creates kind of like the baseline. The thing from the New York Times, they're doing yeoman's work on behalf of the creative community to increase that number by putting pressure on.
Yeah.
So, like, that gets, I would say, closer to a fair attribution between contributions on the IP side, creative work side, and technology. But there can only be so many direct licenses, because as big as we think that these generative AI companies are, they still have a limited number of internal business development people, lawyers, deal makers, etc. So I think there's going to be some kind of compensation system that operates for everybody else. And I'm working on one such system with some people right now that's my perspective, and I
Right.
think that it's very fair to the those who want to participate on the media side, they will be setting the terms that they will still need to be agreed to, of
Yeah.
course, by the generative AI licensees. But nonetheless, I'm working on a mass solution in that regard with some very well-resourced people. And then I think that they're ultimately also, for the longer tail, there's going to be some kind of like automatic opt-in system. You want your content to be scrapable and then be able to get paid some money from it. Kind of like a content ID system for YouTube
Yeah.
or a royalty system like in Spotify.
Right. Um, it sounds like what you're working on. It sounds like blockchain might be part of the solution, smart contracts. I don't know if you can say that or not, but the altruism of what Web3 and blockchain was supposed to be about was supposed to be doing exactly that. How do you track one piece of content as it goes through 100 iterations and still reward
Yeah.
the original creator, knowing that let's just say a TikTok video, you could do duets with it. The person who made the duet out of it could get compensated, but the original creator could get compensated. That
Yeah.
that compensation isn't happening right now, but there's these models of not even using AI, but just content, which has been a problem for a long time, of creators getting their content ripped off and not getting monetized. But for 2 years, I had explored that with another tech company that didn't quite get off the ground. It was, trying to do social media done right,
Yeah.
but they ran out of money. But, sad story there. But the idea that blockchain and smart contracts that can track something as it flows through internet seems like there's a solution there, and it would be interesting to have AI and blockchain get together and figure out some of these problems.
Yeah. Look, I think that what you just said is one of the likely ways that this is going to be trackable and payable in that kind of sense. There was a company I was talking to, and I forgot which one now, um, that was doing similar things, but it wasn't a blockchain like solution. It was something else, and I forgot exactly how they did it. But from what I understand from the experts, I'm not the engineer, but I'm pretty deep on blockchain Web3 stuff. Yeah, I think that's a perfect match. That's a use case for Web3 that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, please, thank you. It wasn't NFTs and it wasn't crypto, but it's something else. And it's digital rights management, which has long been an issue. Certainly I was in the home entertainment business at Universal,
Yeah.
and it's like, how do you control your movies? Before they're released, they're already on a DVD in Hong Kong being sold on the street. And, that's piracy. So how do you combat that? Same with music. How do you combat that? So digital rights management has been an issue for a very long time. But now it's amplified with, all this new AI technology.
Yeah.
Let's talk about music just a little because Suno and some of these other programs, they're
Yep.
pretty cool. They're pretty cool. What are your thoughts about where that's going and how that has not necessarily been ethically sourced?
Well, so just in the last 2 weeks, the RIAA just filed major litigation against both Suno and Udio on behalf of the major labels for copyright infringement for the reasons that I indicated already. And I'll give you an example. So, there was an example on a recent podcast, I think it was Hard Fork, where they one of those two services spit out an ABBA song, ABBA like Dancing
Yeah.
Queen,
Right.
that sounded just like ABBA. It was slightly different melody, but it sounded just like ABBA. And so, the question is, how was Suno or Udio able to do that? And so it's pretty clear that only because it was able to suck in and train on, the ABBA songs that were out there and the artists, etc. So first of all, on the music, just like the other cases I was talking about, both of those services and others like it say that they train on publicly available data. And now, like I said, it's pretty demonstrably true that, and many have verified that they're training on songs and recorded music out there, like I said. And then there's the examples on the output side. And and in that case, so there's major lawsuits against both those companies. And in one of those two cases, one of the investors, this is not a good fact for them. It's the quintessential smoking gun. One of the two investors was publicly on record, like in an interview several months ago, saying that, if he probably wouldn't have invested in the company if if that company was out there trying to do label negotiations or license the music, because that would be too costly or whatever. Like, he said that on the record. So it's clear that what they were trying to do is just create, like entrepreneurs do, and especially in the tech world, just move fast, and then ask for forgiveness later. Forgiveness isn't working too well right now. They're being sued. So I think that those two services are in real trouble because there's a lot of power going after them. And and then, sorry, there's a dog barking in the background.
It's okay.
But yeah, hold on. But apart from that, there's another that I think is interesting to check out, and it's called it's called Gem, I believe, and Gem AI, and it's ethically sourced. So it sells itself as being ethically sourced, just like I was saying before. So that's its selling point. So it's a music generator that does the same things as Suno and Udio, but it says it does it differently.
Yeah. And that's good. I think that's going to be a new trend.
Yeah.
And I think that is alt tech working. Big tech made all these original sins, committed all these
Yes.
original sins. I don't know how you get that genie back in the bottle, but I think all these alt tech companies are popping up and doing the right thing from all this learning, knowing that they don't want to get sued. So how do we work around that? What do we do? What do we have to, what do we build our LLM off of? And is it ethically sourced? And then use that as positioning to help dispel the fear. I think that's all good. That will increase adoption
Oh
and
yeah.
uh, make it readily available to many people. So I'm encouraged by that.
By the way, on that, it's Gen, Jen,
Oh, JE.
Gen
Okay.
Music. So Gen AI, and
Okay.
you'll be able to find it out there. And so it's worth checking out. I
Yeah.
hear good things about that company.
Awesome. We're getting towards the end of our podcast here, but I wanted to give you a chance to plug whatever you want. I know that you have some digital Hollywood sessions coming up.
Yep. And so I'm moderating two panels on Digital Hollywood. So Monday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, it goes live. So you can stream it then, and it's free on Digital Hollywood. So you can just register at the Digital Hollywood site. It will be on demand later after that video. But it's talked about the generative AI video timeline. So it's experts in the industry, a panel I created where they talk about, okay, what are the practical applications today in Hollywood in the video side for generative AI? Where will it be a year from now, 3 years from, 5 years from now, and whether there will ever be feature films essentially that at feature film quality that are generated by AI, and when. Just a couple of the panelists to show you how cool it is and why it's worthwhile. So Andy Beach, who's the CTO of Microsoft's M&E group, Media and Entertainment Group, he's one of the guests. And
Okay.
so like that's a great voice. And then on Wednesday, I think it's at 3 p.m. Pacific time, I have a legal sort of discussion about the status of all the major cases, what they are, and then also like how a media company should decide to litigate or not litigate. What are the ways you think about it? Like, what are the steps you take? And I have one of one of the nation's foremost IP litigators who's an amazing, I've seen him in action. His name is Chad Hummel. And then Dr. Moya McTeer, who's the spokesperson for the Human Artistry Campaign, and that's the organization that represents over 200 media and entertainment organizations. It's a consortium. She's the spokesperson who goes to Capitol Hill to speak on their behalf, et cetera. So she's going to talk about the status of regulation, et cetera. So thanks for plugging that. I think for
Yeah.
everybody out there, it's worthwhile. And then if you're interested in how generative AI impacts media and entertainment, I write a weekly column in the Wrap, yes, but I also have a weekly newsletter called The Brain, and it's themediabrain.substack.com. So it's on Substack. It's free. It's weekly. I give my analysis and I give the top 10 headlines from the past week. And I have a companion podcast called The Brain that I started now too. So for those of you who want to listen and walk your dogs instead of reading, it's there for you.
There you go. Awesome. All right. Well, listen, thanks so much. And I want to have you back on again because there's so much to talk about still. But for those viewers and listeners, thanks for tuning in, and catch more of our Realm IQ sessions on your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify and YouTube. And please follow and smash that subscribe button. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Kurt. Really good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Realm IQ. Book your corporate AI workshop today.
KurtDoty.co. Branding, marketing and product development.